Textbooks and tie-outs. Who knew the college bookstore could be used for more than just ordering school supplies? I'm Chris McCullick, and this is my ELS submission. In the fall of 2017, I began working on a creative audit engagement experience of sorts, in the form of a hands-on inventory observation simulation that used our college bookstore as the focal point. The goal of the exercise was to take auditing concepts, like an inventory observation, from an upper-level accounting course that were typically only discussed theoretically and provide the students with practical application in a way that was fun, engaging, and fast-paced. The project was focused on inventory really for two primary reasons. First, whereas the audit of balance sheet accounts like cash, accounts receivable, or accounts payable might be taught in a practical manner in the classroom by creating fictitious bank statements or invoices or subledger detail, inventory has more of a material tangibility. It's not that these other accounts don't exist, but that students are more accustomed to accepting bank statements as a substitute for actual cash. They can conceptualize vendor invoices as representing accounts payable. However, for some reason, it's been my experience that when students are presented only with subledger detail or warehouse inventory listings to audit inventory, there seems to be a disconnect between talking about auditing inventory and actually conducting an audit of inventory through practical means like an inventory observation. The second reason is that procedures like inventory observations are one of the first things that first-year auditors or perhaps even interns are tasked with. I wanted students to not only understand the importance of them and how they're conducted, but I wanted the students to be able to apply critical thinking skills, professional skepticism, and be taught how to look for risks during the process. The overall idea of the simulation was that students would assume the role of audit seniors who were tasked with conducting an inventory observation at a new client, WJC Books & More. While our college bookstore is not actually named WJC Books & More, nor is it a self-contained entity, it was assumed for the purposes of this project it would be. During the inventory observation, students didn't just perform test counts of inventory, although that did take place, but they also documented internal controls, assessed risks, questioned the client, and performed brief analytical procedures. In order to foster engagement and ensure that students stayed on task, I assumed the role of the bookstore manager during the exercise, and I may or may not have used an accent. At any rate, this allowed me to efficiently and effectively answer any client questions that the students posed to ensure that both the learning objectives were being met and that students were challenged to use professional skepticism and not just accept the first answer that they were given. Often, I phrased that answer to be intentionally inadequate. To guide students in the exercise, several handouts were created, including a simulation worksheet where all work was documented and email correspondence with the audit manager to both orient the students as to the simulation and introduce the students to the client. In the end, I was really happy with how this exercise turned out. The students were extremely engaged, had a lot of fun, and most importantly, appeared to achieve the learning objectives sought after. To provide you with more insight, here's how the activity was designed and implemented in the classroom. This project idea was formulated while brainstorming ways in which I could provide students with practical experience to rectify what I believed was a deficiency in their ability to audit inventory. Upon having the idea, I took several trips to the bookstore and ultimately was able to receive a walkthrough of the inventory procedures and processes from the bookstore manager, as well as obtain several bookstore reports, such as inventory listings and count instructions. After obtaining the bookstore manager's buy-in for the exercise and gaining an understanding of the exercise's feasibility, I outlined various learning objectives from the AICPA pre-certification core competencies, the course syllabus, and the course textbook, and matched those learning objectives with activities that I thought would be doable within the simulation. For instance, in order to meet the AICPA pre-certification accounting competency, risk assessment, analysis, and management, students were required to identify risk associated with the company, the inventory balances, and inventory-related internal controls, as well as actually interview the client, played by me, regarding at least one of the risks identified while utilizing professional skepticism. While this is just one learning objective example, a full listing of learning objectives and activities can be found in the appendix to this project. After establishing the learning objectives and activities, I then developed 6 simulation handouts in order to facilitate the exercise. These included a partial inventory listing, count instructions, an invoice example, email correspondence, a simulation worksheet, and a prior year process narrative. 3 of these documents were particularly important to the exercise. To create a partial inventory listing, I first obtained an actual on-hand inventory listing from the bookstore. I intentionally made non-random selections from this listing for students to use as their test counts. I tried to ensure that students would have to go to various areas of the store, be confronted with different types of inventory, and encounter potentially obsolete items. Within the listing, I intentionally changed the dollar amounts and the inventory counts to hide any proprietary information, as well as intentionally included errors for students to find both during their counts as well as their cross-footing procedures. But the inventory itself was absolutely real, in front of them, and 100% tangible. In order to facilitate the actual count, I worked with the bookstore manager to count the selections during the afternoon before the simulation, and then used actual count tags to tape in the relevant areas. This added authenticity to the project and oriented the students on where their test counts would be located. To introduce students to the simulation, I created fictitious email correspondence between the audit manager, a fictitious individual, and the audit seniors, the students. Within the correspondence, students were introduced to the client, prompted to follow up on certain risk areas, directed to complete specific simulation activities, given a time frame for how long it should take to complete each activity, and provided with relevant account balances and instructed to document their work using the simulation worksheet. To facilitate the completion of the simulation activities, I also constructed a simulation worksheet. This was really the only deliverable that students were required to hand in. Within the worksheet was a partially completed count sheet, as well as questions regarding audit theory, risk assessment, and internal controls. In this way, they could sort of combine the practical application they were getting with the concepts we were discussing in class. It was here that students documented all their work. Students were provided with most of the handouts ahead of time, although the simulation worksheet and the partial inventory listing was withheld from the students until the day of the event to ensure that they did not complete the work ahead of time. Additionally, there was a lot of thought and small touches that went into the creation of each handout and of each aspect of the exercise. For instance, to ensure that students considered the concept of inventory obsolescence, I went as far as to make my own inventory by cheaply fashioning a t-shirt bearing the school name but the wrong mascot. For instance, William Jewell College is the Cardinals. My t-shirt had a rooster. The difference was intentionally obvious, fairly humorous, and placed in a location that was extremely noticeable, prompting all students to make inquiries about it. The simulation was designed for a class size of 15 to 20 upper-level accounting students and conducted during an external audit course. In terms of timing, the simulation was scheduled to coordinate with the textbook chapter covering the audit of inventory. The simulation took place over a 1-hour-long class period, and within the appendices to this activity, I've included a minute-by-minute breakdown of how the activity should be organized. To conduct the activity, students were split into 3 groups of 5 to 6 individuals. After brief instructions, each group, on a rotating basis, was given 12 minutes to perform pre-selected inventory test counts and 24 minutes to complete the simulation worksheet, where all their work was documented. Students were given a short debrief afterwards and asked to take a brief assessment of the activity. One step that was key to ensuring that the activity ran smoothly was that students were informed well in advance that the simulation would be fast-paced, and as such, they needed to prepare accordingly. Students were provided with most of the handouts ahead of time, and they were assigned chapter readings to orient them with the general inventory observation process. Students were also informed that this activity would be graded and take the place of one of their class quizzes, and as such, they had some incentive to put forth the effort. As stated before, each of the participant groups went through a brief debriefing session after completing the exercise. During that time, they were asked for verbal feedback as well as filled out an assessment tool. Overall, the response was great. Most of the students had nothing but positive comments. And on a scale from 1 to 10, 100% of the students scored the activity as a 7 or above in requiring or enhancing their inventory audit knowledge. Additionally, 100% of the students scored the activity as a 7 or above in requiring or enhancing their use of internal control knowledge. And 91% scored the activity as a 7 or above in requiring or enhancing their ability to use professional skepticism. What I loved most about this activity was watching students engage with the material. During the simulation, we were no longer just talking conceptually about the idea of auditing inventory, or internal controls, or assessing risk. We were actually doing it. And the fast-paced interaction brought a sense of authenticity to the exercise and required students to completely immerse themselves in it. Overall, it went pretty well. If given the opportunity, there are 2 modifications I'd like to make to the exercise going forward. First, I'd like to try conducting the exercise over 2 days instead of 1. This semester I'm going to have a bigger audit class, and I'd like to try splitting them up into groups of 4 so that 2 groups will go each day. This way, each group would have more time with the exercise, but there would still be a fast-paced enough version of it in order to make sure there was still engagement. Second, I'd like to develop a more robust evaluation tool. During this pilot test of sorts, I really created just a simplified assessment. I'd like to spend more time working with the assessment and the debriefing process to make sure that the objectives that I want to meet are actually being met. Thanks so much for your consideration. The students and I really had a great time working through the simulation. I appreciate the opportunity to share it with you all, and I look forward to discussing it further in August. See you soon.